shot so that you guys can actually hear me. I apologize. I'm a little discombobulated this morning. I got a good night's sleep, which is nice. I got to sleep in just a little bit, which was lovely. Okay, just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. I think I froze there for a second while I was putting my AirPods in. I cannot see if anybody is here or not. There we go. Hey, Irish Jen, thank you so much for being here. And I want to just tell everybody, Jen has been amazing this whole time. I have been so crazy busy and involved with so many different things, and Jen has helped me out so much. I could not have done all of this stuff without her. So be sure to send some love her way. It's great to see you guys here. I am live at the Maricopa County Courthouse at the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell. It is day 6. We had some motions happen first thing this morning and a little bit of fiery, I don't know, events as it is. Never just business as usual when we're talking about Lori Vallow Daybell representing herself in this conspiracy trial. Man, I've just done a lot of decompressing and unpacking thoughts and feelings with good friends and family. And so I have a lot of different things swirling around in my brain right now. So I'm going to try to make this recap as brief as possible so that I can get to a place where I can write and do some brain dumping, because I just have too many things that I'm thinking about at once. I'm going to recap as I always do, as if you're not in the courtroom, just because I know some people are not watching because they can't stand to hear or see Lori in the courtroom. And believe me, I identify with that. I understand it completely. I'm going to turn my screen up a little so I can see. It is triggering to see Lori up there pretending to be a lawyer and with zero recognition of anything that she has done, zero recognition of how she has hurt victims and their families. And it's really difficult to know all of these things about her and then see her acting in court pretending as though nothing has happened. And I think the reason that's triggering for me is because I was used to that family dynamic of we just pretend everything is fine no matter what's going on, instead of being genuine about our feelings and our emotions. And so then people in the family system see someone as genuine as threatening and as disgusting, because emotions, ew, gross. How dare you have emotions? You should just pretend like everything's fine. And I have to admit, it's been tough since Thursday, with everything else going on outside of the courtroom. But as I've said, I don't want to focus on the outside drama right this moment. I want to focus on justice for Charles. And I am working on the video that I'm going to use to respond to what happened over the weekend with some of my other family members. And it's probably not going to be what you expect or what you think. It's really going to be a discussion of the dynamics. And, this is how we got here in the first place. So I really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm Lori Vallow Daybell's first cousin. And I spent a lot of time with her and the Cox family. And I speak a lot to the dynamics of how we got here, how Lori got to the way that she was. And I am very passionate about teaching people to recognize manipulative behaviors and to defend against controlling people. And we've seen some excellent examples of it here in the courtroom. First with Nancy Joe, I think it was on day 3 that just went completely gray rock on Lori and did not engage with her, did not fall prey to Lori's tactics of baiting her into an argument or a conversation. She did a great job of that. Adam did some of that as well. We've seen a lot of that happening over the course of the trial, and I love pointing out to people, when someone is trying to manipulate you, this is how you respond. Kay was absolutely fabulous. When Kay sat back in her chair and sort of folded her hands, I was like, man, she is in control. She's the one in charge. And I think that sent a very clear message to Lori that Kay cannot be manipulated. And it was great. So let's get to what went on this morning in the courtroom. First of all, before the jury came in, we met at 10 o'clock And the jury wasn't supposed to be there until 10:15 because we had all of these motions that we needed to go through. And we've been talking about this a little bit each day to try and finally get to some kind of a resolution about this. And the very first thing that came up was that it seemed as though prosecutor Trina Kay was infuriated that Lori Vallow Daybell has sent yet another subpoena to a protected victim in this case. Larry Woodcock received a subpoena to appear in this case, and he is a designated victim. The defense team is not supposed to be contacting victim families or even have the victims' families' information. And yesterday, Lori addressed the fact that a subpoena was sent to Charles's brother, Bobby Vallow. And Lori tried to claim that it was a clerical error. This sometimes happens, when I'm on the jail phone and it cuts off every 20 minutes, and they were never supposed to send him a subpoena. And I apologize to the family for any distress that caused, and it seemed to sort of just go away. Well, this morning, once again, Larry Woodcock receives a subpoena. That's Kay Woodcock's husband. And so the prosecution said, the defendant is violating victims' rights by sending that subpoena out. He was not on her 15.2 list, which means her list of witnesses. And how did ODPS even get that information? And Trina says, Lori says, I didn't realize it was a subpoena. It was a mistake. It wasn't supposed to go out. Trina says, Lori Vallow is the one signing the subpoenas. And Lori basically just said, oh, I signed a stack of them without looking. And then she very flippantly said, I apologize to the families. That was it. Judge Boreski said, I need you to be more diligent. You can't be having these kinds of things happen, especially for the next trial. He said, I'm not going to be as lenient on the next trial as I am on this one. I'm paraphrasing a little bit his exact words, but basically he was very firm with her and very stern with her that she needs to stop these shenanigans. Then we have a motion in limine where there is going to be an officer who takes the stand. Lori has revealed that she has a line of questioning involving why she wasn't charged, or why she and her brother were not arrested right away, or why it took so long for her to be charged in the case. And she was prohibited by the judge. She was prohibited for asking any questions that bring that into evidence. And then there's another motion in limine. There apparently is a video that Janice Cox and Summer Shiflett watched, and basically the state wants to restrict it. They're not allowed to testify about what they saw on the video. And Lori argues, without that video, there would be no gun, there would be no bat. So apparently there was a video that Janice and Summer saw that made them believe something about Charles that made Lori afraid, is kind of what Lori is trying to allege in this case. And basically, the judge said that, it's kind of a moot point, because at this point, Janice and Summer haven't been subpoenaed. We don't even know if they're going to show up to testify. And so he said, well, I guess we'll deal with that if they show up. Then there was a motion in limine by the state to preclude defense witnesses. So they asked about Vicea, who is Tylee's friend. Lori didn't even know if Vicea had been served yet. She said, I'll have to check with my investigator. And then she said the investigator has made contact with Bonilla. We believe that's her former bishop, and that they attempted to serve him but weren't able to. They were not able to serve or find Ashlyn Rind. And Lori said she wasn't even sure if Barry Cox, her father, had been served yet, which I find to be sort of ridiculous. She wants Barry to testify about helping her with the life insurance policy, but it's not really material to the case, I don't think. And it sounds like Barry doesn't want to testify. Then Judge Boreski said, we're kind of out of time. In fact, I shouldn't even say kind of, we're out of time. I don't need to preclude any of these people from your list because they haven't even been served. And if they're served, they may not testify until they've had an interview with the state. And it's doubtful as to whether or not there's enough time to get that done, seeing as how the state said yesterday that they're going to rest their case in chief probably on Thursday. So then they talked about Zach Cox. The state interviewed him. They don't believe that he has relevant info. Lori says, yes, he does have relevant info. And the judge says, well, what is that? And Lori basically tried to say that Zach was with Adam the day before, the day of, and the day after the shooting. And she's calling him to verify or unverify, she says, Alex Cox's testimony. And then Trina Kay says, I have no idea what he would be called about to what, impeach Adam's testimony. And judge said, confirming or disputing Adam's testimony. And Lori says, disputing. And Trina Kay says that she's not aware of the interview that Jeff White spoke of, where he interviewed Zach Cox. She said, I believe it was just that he spoke with him, not that it was a full interview. And apparently Trina became aware that Zach was living with Charles and Lori prior to their separation. And then Jeff White, Lori's investigator, said that Zach was very belligerent when he interviewed him and did not agree with Alex's testimony. Judge Boreski asked if he'd been served, and Lori said his subpoena's with OPDS. And judge says, see if he'll show up. And then if he shows up, we will determine whether or not he has relevant information. So then we got right to continuing the cross-examine of Detective Inclan, who is the one who interviewed Lori and Tylee at the police office. And they were talking about the chain of custody for the cell phone. Lori says, it went from you to the property room. She said, no, it went to the computer crimes division. It was about a 20-minute drive. I did not access the phone. And Lori said, did you look to see whether the threatening text existed? No, she didn't. I didn't show you if the threatening text. Did you ask me for them? Was I cooperative? And all of this was just going to basically, Lori complied with everything, but the detective messed up, I think is what Lori's alleging. And then she said, would I have been cooperative if you had asked me to show you the text? Objection to speculation. Was Alex cooperative? She said, I didn't interview Alex. And then she just went through the same questions that the state went through yesterday. And here is my take on that. The reason that Lori is doing that, I think, is because when she just repeats the state's questions, what she'll say is, you were asked yesterday if you blah, blah, blah. Yes, that's correct. And you stated yesterday that blah, blah, blah. Yes, that's correct. So she'll ask the witness a question the witness has already been asked, and then the witness reconfirms it. I think the reason Lori is doing this is because she gets objected to a lot less often when she is just repeating these questions, because obviously the witness is going to answer yes. Yes, Lori, you wrote it down correctly. Yes, you remember it correctly. I think that gives Lori a hit of dopamine. I think that makes her feel good about herself, like she's actually accomplishing something when she asks a question and gets the witness to confirm. That's just my take on it. I think it's just sort of self-serving. She knows it's not really moving the football down the field. Like, she's not getting any evidence in that hasn't already been stated. But I think that just really just makes her feel good about herself when she's failing in so many other ways. She gets objected to all the time. She's not asking the correct questions. She's not getting her narrative out there. And she, at this point, doesn't have a case. She doesn't have any witnesses. So she, I guess, feels like she has to win somewhere. So I think that's the reason she's doing it. Lori asks Inclan if she was aware that Lori had two phones. No. Did you ask me? No. Were you aware that Charles Vallow stole my phone and I had to replace it? Again, objection to testifying. This is how Lori's starting to try and get her narrative in, is by testifying. She's been warned about this so often. And then she has a question about whether or not the detective knew that she kept both phones after replacing one. Again, objection, and it was sustained right away. Was Detective Inclan aware of the $2 million life insurance policy that Lori had? She said, I wasn't aware. I didn't investigate it. And Lori asked her about, you didn't see that in the Bates reports. She said, the Bates reports come from the county attorney. That's after my portion of the investigation. Then Lori started asking about the FAC facility that Lori and Tylee were sent to for the interviews. She's super paranoid about who has seen these interviews. So she wanted to know if there was someone watching live and who that person was. And she got the name of that person. What purpose does that serve? Who knows? But she wanted to know if the interviews were being monitored from a room upstairs, how many people could see them, who could see them. And then she wanted to know if it was possible that Detective Moffat could have watched her interview and then went to go interview Alex Cox. And there was an objection to speculation there. Detective Inclan noted that there was someone who was watching on a monitor at their desk, and the rooms upstairs were not used. Then Lori started questioning about why they were released that day. Who decided to send us home? Who decided to release us? Detective Inclan said, I decided to drive you back to the scene. Detective Moffat and her had a brief conversation about whether to go back to the house and how to facilitate that. And then Lori asks, and this is something that I didn't realize was in existence, so I'm going to have to go look it up and see. Was Detective Inclan aware of the press release that was sent out by the Chandler Police Department that day? And she said, no, that was probably, some other person. I wasn't aware of it. And then there was a whole bunch of asked and answered that went on for that as well. Then she said, did the case agent authorize the public relations person? And she said it was published by the press information officer. And then Lori wanted to know, do you know that person? Do you know why they decided to do it? She couldn't testify to any of those things because that's not her. She said, did you realize that, then she went into this line of questioning about not giving the cell phone back during the altercation. Lori said, did you realize it was a short altercation, just about 2 minutes? And detective said, well, I think you told me it was 2 minutes long, and short or long is kind of relative to, who's interpreting it. And then she said, did you know JJ was outside? Did you know the car was running? Did you know he was in the front seat? And the detective said, yeah, I don't remember if you said the front seat. Did you know JJ had autism? Did you verify that? And she said, yeah, I spoke with his school. Lori wanted to know when and who she spoke with at the school. And then she asked her how long afterwards. It was several months later that she did that. And then Lori wanted to ask about Burger King. Did Burger King verify the order that I had that morning? And she said, yeah, Burger King verified. And also you told me it was chicken fries and a Sprite. And Lori was incredulous. Did you also realize that I ordered 2 bottles of water? And then she said, do you realize that adrenaline makes you incredibly thirsty? Do you realize that when fight or flight kicks in, that the adrenaline pumps up and you just become incredibly thirsty? And then there's an objection as to speculation. It's just silly, this line of questioning, which was sustained. And then she said, did you offer us apple juice when we were at the police office? And it's like, what difference does it freaking make? And then she wanted to go down this line of like, have you ever seen me not calm? And then there's an objection to foundation. The judge says, you need to lay some foundation. Oh, thanks, Diana Magnum, for the super sticker. Appreciate you. Hey, Jen, if I miss anybody's super sticker because I'm looking at my notes, please thank them for me and please pin it for me. I just really appreciate you guys' support. It's really awesome. So then Lori wants to know about my nonchalantness, and there's an objection, and Lori says, just I wanted to know if she observed me at any other time, and nonchalant, and the judge is shutting it down, and so she asks for a sidebar so she can ask for a question. So at this point, I'm observing that Judge Boreski has been so patient with her that I think that Lori views his guidance as an opportunity to exploit the situation, basically to get advice from Judge Boreski. And I'm curious about how he's going to respond. So I'm watching the judge during this sidebar, and it's the most animated I've ever seen him. If you've been watching Judge Boreski, he's very calm. He's very even keeled. He doesn't get upset about things. You can tell when he's annoyed, and he does have some annoyed facial expressions that he will put out there, but he generally doesn't get very animated. But in this sidebar, he's standing up. They're having a malfunction with the headphone unit. So they both go approach the bench. The judge is standing up, talking down to Lori, and his head is moving back and forth, and he's gesturing to the witness. This is the most animated I've seen him. So he's clearly telling her, you've got to cut this out. You can't keep asking these kinds of questions. So then she comes back, and her first question is, did you discover that I ran out of the house without shoes? And she says, yes, kind of. Did you know that I went to Walgreens? Well, you told me that, but a different detective verified it. How hot was it that day in July of 2019? And she says, it was probably warm, in the hundreds. She says, well, it was July in Arizona, so it was probably warm. Lori said, was it too hot for me to be walking on the sidewalk to take my son to school? And then there's an objection as to relevance. And the judge says, I think the jury can draw their own conclusions about the temperature in July in Arizona. And everybody laughed. It was funny. It was a silly moment. Um, and then I lost my place. Uh, so then Lori asks, okay, so did we arrive back at the residence and talk to detective? And she was about to say crowd time. Hi, China Clay. Thank you so much for the super sticker. I appreciate you. Um, and then she started to mess up the name again. And In-Clan corrected her and said crowd time. And she laughed. She openly laughed for several seconds. This is a joke to her. Like, this whole thing is a joke. It's so funny that I messed up his name once again. It's just so awful to see that she just has zero recognition that she has hurt people, and that, you know, her children are dead, and that, her husband, former husband, is dead, and she just seems to think this whole thing is such a joke, and it's so disgusting. I really hate it. Um, then she does another review of the state's questioning as to whether or not she was cooperative. And then she finally finishes with, was there any time that I was not cooperative? Thank you so much, Grayson. Lauren is over there doing her hidden true crime. You guys make sure to go over to her live after this. Lauren's producer, Grayson, was kind enough to order me some lunch so that I can have some chicky nuggies. I just don't have time to do all of that in this, and I so appreciate it so much. Okay, so then the jury came up with some questions, and there were several. So I was really hoping the jury was going to ask some really good questions of this detective, who was the one who interviewed both Lori and Tylee. She was there interacting with the detective that interviewed Alex Cox. I was hoping they were going to ask some really great questions, but what they asked was the rental vehicle searched? And it was not. They asked, why did Lori and Tylee leave with a victim advocate if they were being interviewed as witnesses? And then the detective went in and basically explained that the victim's advocate sometimes assists with families through this process of dealing with a crime, even when they aren't necessarily classified legally as victims. And the focus was on really Tylee Ryan receiving victim advocacy because this was her dad or her stepdad. And then the final question from the jury that they allowed to come in was if they are required to allow people to know if they're being recorded or if they're being monitored at the police station. And Detective Inclan said there is no expectation of privacy in a police station, so we don't have to notify people. So then Ariel Werther came in, who is the cell and GPS data recovery expert for the Chandler Police Department. But he needed to set up some tech. They're going to do a slide presentation and show some videos. And so while that was happening, they released the jury so that they could do a sidebar to complete the record since their equipment was malfunctioning. And during this, we got to learn Lori wanted to ask how many times Detective Inclan observed her, including in Idaho and in social media posts like the recent interviews that Lori did, to compare her demeanor in all of those interactions with how she was on the day. And the judge advised her not to open that door, basically saying that, your in-court behavior, somebody's going to behave very differently than they do when they're not in court. But he said, you don't want to open that door. And then it was not applicable if they asked for attorney. Oh, sorry. Then they went through the jury questions that they weren't gonna allow in. And one was if Lori ever asked for an attorney. There was another one about whether or not they did a psychological profile or they could have done a psychological profile, which uh, would have required a legal conclusion. And so that was not allowed. And then they asked if you need permission to interview a minor. And again, that would have required a legal conclusion. So they didn't allow that as well. And then they asked if law enforcement have to advise that they're being audio video recorded. So that's the one that did get in. So then Ariel Werther gets up on direct examination. He gives his qualifications for, all of his training that he's received up to this point, and reveals that he's working in robbery homicide as a cell and GPS data inspector. I found it interesting. He started out as a 911 call operator. Then he became a patrol officer. Then he was a field supervisor. And then he moved to the special victims unit and then to where he is right now. So basically, they went through all these qualifications and then they qualified him as somebody who was qualified to review the data from the phone, from Charles Vallow's phone, and the data from everything that was happening that day. And they started out by saying that they learned, Ariel Werther learned that Charles Vallow was at a hotel. um, Lori had Charles's wallet. That's important. People were asking me about that yesterday. Where was his wallet? Where was his cell phone? Well, Lori had both of those things. So she also had his hotel room key. And he thought that Lori was at the house when Charles was shot. And so they were talking about the timing of the Burger King visit. The 911 call came in at 8:36, and then Lori arrived back at the home at 8:48. And so it was kind of suspicious that there was only 12 minutes. There was no way for her to get to Burger King, get to the school, and which was 7 miles away, and then get back to the house in just 12 minutes. So the Burger King timestamp on the Burger King video was 7:54 a.m. and the 911 call wasn't until 8:36 a.m. Then they showed Charles Vallow's hotel receipts. He was in room 127. Detective Moffat and Ariel Werther went there to claim the evidence. They impounded a backpack, 2 suitcases, and at least 1 laptop. And then they reviewed the GPS data extraction on Charles Vallow's phone. Somebody had told the detective, or at least maybe he misunderstood, that they had gone to a CVS and not a Walgreens. So he actually went and visited 7 CVS locations in the vicinity to say, did someone with this description come in? Before he finally decided to call for some help. And then they were able to use Charles Vallow's GPS data to see that it was actually a Walgreens. So then they showed the Walgreens receipt. I think they were 2 pair of flip-flops, and it was something like less than $9, which is, I don't know, I thought that was interesting and funny. And then they started describing the different phones that after lunch, we're going to see all the data that came off of these phones. Lori had 2 phones. She had a Verizon phone with an 808 number, and then she had a second T-Mobile phone with a 480 number. Then they confirmed Alex's phone number, which was also a 480 number. And I noted the ending numbers just so I can keep track of what text messages come in after lunch. And then he said that even though the reason for him actually going to the CVS and going to the Burger King is because even though they have the GPS data, they always like to try and confirm it or corroborate it with a second source. And so that was the reason for going through that. Now, when we get back from lunch, I'm expecting that we're going to see text messages that went back and forth between Alex Cox and Lori Vallow. We possibly may see some text messages going back and forth from Lori and Chad. And I think we're going to get a much better picture of exactly what these two were doing between the time that Charles Vallow was shot and the time that Alex called 911. I'm also hoping to see and hear all of the data and evidence that relates to what Lori and Alex did with Charles's phone, because we already know that there was at least one text message that came in after Charles was shot, but it was viewed at 12:30 in the afternoon. So we know that Lori and or Alex were looking at that phone. Oh, thank you so much, C. Charles, for that super sticker. I appreciate you guys who support me. Thank you so much for being here with me. My recap is going to be a little late this afternoon because at 6 o'clock local time, I'm going to be on the Vinnie Politan show again. I'll be on for the entire hour. I'm not sure who else he will have on. It's always a little bit of anxiety inducing because I never know who's going to pop up on the screen or what questions they're going to ask. Sometimes they give me a little bit of a heads up beforehand, but usually it's just right in the minute. I listen to Vinnie introduce it and then I have to answer a question. So anyway, it's a little bit nerve wracking, but I'll be on there from 6 to 7 and then my recap will start shortly after that. Again, thank you so much for being here. Please hit the like. Please let other people know about these recaps if you find them helpful. Bring your friends next time. And as always, please be good to each other, but most importantly, be good to yourselves. I hope that you're doing some self-care during this time. And thank you so much for caring about justice for the victims, and especially for Charles Vallow. That's who we're here for. Thank you so much, Raquel, for the super sticker. Take care, you guys. I'll see you soon.